Hey, it's so good to be with you this evening, and I love this time of year. Changes in the air, and I appreciate you guys joining us, sitting down and getting into the Word with us. And if you're watching on Facebook, if you could hit like, if you're watching on YouTube, if you could hit subscribe, and please comment. We want to, as a church, be able to minister to you and love you as our online campus, and just thank you for taking the time and getting into the Word with us. Now, we've been in a new series called Detours, and what do you do when life takes a turn? And we all experience this. There's no one in life who I think is untouched by this, and there are things that come that surprise us, and things that go on in our lives that sometimes catch us off guard. But what do we do in those moments? And I love this idea because it sometimes feels like whenever there is a detour, we always feels like it's bad or it's wrong. But I think that God is intentional and God is purposeful and God allows things to come to our lives. And so what feels like a detour to me could be the perfect will of God being worked out in real time in our lives. And I think when I understand that they could be a God detour, I have to step back and handle them differently and embrace them differently. I got to know and keep in front of me that His ways are not my ways and His thoughts are not my thoughts. And that in life, it's not about my comfort, even though we're driven by comfort. But it's not about my comfort, but it's about His will being worked out in me. And every detour that we face, whether you realize it or not, you possess all that you have, or all that you need, rather, to be obedient in it. And I realize that there are times where God, this is hard, or God, this is tough. How do I get through this? How do I do this? Because some detours are big. Some detours are costly. How do I do this, God? And the answer is this: it's always with Him. It's always with Him. God never sets you up to fail if you're willing to hear Him and obey Him. There's always a purpose to what God does and what God is doing. And so when Scripture says He prepares good works in advance for you, I think that means this, that these things are custom made for you with your personality, you with your gifting, you with your temperament. I mean, God created works in advance that you are perfectly suited to move in obedience in, and His will be done. And so these are things that God does for everyone, but there are specific things, that's the word, that He does for you and your life. And I think it's so important for you and I to trust the leading of the Holy Spirit to help us to navigate those things. And so it's not just about when a detour hits and we don't like it, how do I get out of this? Because that's our natural reaction. I don't like this. How do I get out of this? What's the shortest way out? What's the quickest way out? How do I get this fixed so I can move down the road? It's not always about getting out of a situation, but it's sometimes about growing out of a situation. And I find a lot of hope in God, and that in any situation, He can use it to make me more like Him as I hear and as I obey. And I keep saying that, but that is so critical in our lives, hearing God and obeying God. And if God gets us out of a situation and we don't grow from it, we tend to end up going back into a similar situation down the road. Now here's something that's been kind of stirring in me recently, and it's just that even when we understand our calling and the will of God for our lives, I kind of feel like, hey, I know what God's asking of me, I know what God wants me to do. It may look different depending on the season that we're in. In our world, we have 4 different seasons. Farmers, they have 4 different seasons. You've got winter, you've got spring, you've got summer, you've got fall. And farming looks different in each of those seasons. There's times you're sowing seed, times you're preparing the soil, times you're waiting and holding for things to grow and mature. You get the soil right, you sow the seed, you don't harvest next. You have to let it develop and grow. And then there's, the fall where you're harvesting, and then that winter rest where it builds you back up for the spring, and it just is circular. And so I think there are times that you can know what God has called you to do, but the question is, what season are you in? Because if we can have the right will, the right thing, but do it in the wrong season, it's going to struggle. And the wrestling sometimes is really us trying to function in the right thing in the wrong way. And I hear it worded like this: I feel like God called me to, but no doors are opening. It's not going anywhere. And I just think so many times that's right will, wrong seasons. God's perfect will is right will, right season. And so understanding the season that we're in allows us to walk in it fully. We have to trust the Lord, not just for the will, but for the season that He's called us to. And detours can take time. Again, I think our flesh and our nature looks to get out as fast as it can. But sometimes detours take time. And you look through the Word of God. Moses, he was in the wilderness for 40 years in the wilderness. Abraham, from the time he was spoken to about Isaac to the time that Isaac was born, 25 years. Paul, after he was saved and radically changed by the Spirit and the presence of God, there was 3 years that he had a detour in his life. And detours are often God-driven and intentional in our lives to prepare us for what He's wanting to do in us and through us. And so we have to be trusting and patient in them. Now, in them we have hope. Why? Because afflictions develop endurance, and endurance develops our character, and character strengthens our hope, and hope doesn't disappoint. Authentic hope is a learned hope. Now, in detours, there can be pain. They're not always fun, and sometimes they struggle. When you have an idea of what God is saying to you, but it's not what you're dealing with. It's a struggle. Vision's a funny thing. If you hold on to it too long, people die without it. But if you let it out too soon, it gets watered down by everybody else's ideas and what you ought to do. There's a right time and a right season for vision to be cast and sown into the lives of people. And we all probably have had something we felt like the Lord spoke to us about, and you kind of get it, but it just doesn't seem to move. You can't force it, and that's the thing. I'm a big believer in organic ministry. Things grow in timely fashions in the way they were designed to grow, and you can't force it. I can't change timetables, and it's amazing. So we all have these moments, but the truth is that there are times that God's going to ask you to step out and not give you a full picture. Faith, I will say it as 100% thing, and people may argue that, but I think faith is always involved in detours. I don't think you have a detour without an element of faith. I think the sooner that we make room in our lives for God to move that way, the more God is able to move. It's like saying in the world you're going to have trouble. Well, as soon as I stop expecting the faith walk to be perfect, it gets easier because I'm not always disappointed that there are issues or struggles or battles. You kind of have to let it be real so you stop living in false expectations. But we can normalize walking in faith. And what I mean by that is this: trust that God in time will show you what you need to obey and to trust Him in. We've spent the last months and months going over the story of Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob. He grew up in a very dysfunctional home. His father was a known deceiver and a liar and tricked people to get his way. And Jacob tricked his father into giving him his birthright that was due to his older brother Esau. And Jacob had 12 sons from 4 different women, and that could explain some of the dysfunction just with all the baby mama drama. They grew up, their home was it seemed like it was always in a level of chaos. And his son Reuben slept with his dad's concubine, and Levi and Simeon murdered an entire village of men by deceiving them. And Judah had sexual relations with his daughter-in-law, because she was dressed up like he thought she was a prostitute, which I don't think that really makes it better. This family was just messed up. It's reading the book of Genesis is like watching an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. There was all sorts of craziness going on in this family. And on top of it all, there was real favoritism. Jacob loved Joseph more, and everyone knew it. And if you were going to pick a family to bring the 12 tribes of Israel out of and have the Savior come from the tribe of Judah, we probably would have said, let's leave here, let's go check the neighbors, because none of us probably would have picked that family. Joseph was the favorite because he came in Jacob's old age with a wife that he actually loved. And when Rachel died, giving birth to Benjamin, Joseph became his favorite child. And he was given this coat of many colors. No one else had that. And it was a status symbol. It meant something. It was about position and power in the family. And it was clear that Joseph was the favorite. And he was held in a privileged position that belonged to the eldest son. And so the whole family was irritated. And Genesis 37:4 says that they couldn't even speak peaceably to him. One of the translations says that his family couldn't say a kind word. I mean, there was so much disdain and anger and hatred and bitterness that they couldn't even say anything nice. He had the robe. He had been given legacy. He had been exalted. And now Joseph starts having these dreams about his family bowing to him, and it just lit a fuse that was going to blow. In the dream, his brothers were bowing to him, and Joseph at this stage in his life, I think, maybe lacked the maturity to hold close to his heart what he should have held close to his heart. I used to work with a pastor, Bob Ravel. He used to always say this: when God tells you something or shows you something, it is always first and foremost to pray. And, Joseph probably could have used that advice. Then he has another dream where suns and stars and moons are bowing to him. And he told his dad and even his father, who loved him, and he was his favorite, rebuked him. He was so offended by it that he rebuked the one he loved the most. And he's just like, son, you're going too far. And the brothers didn't like it. They couldn't stand him, couldn't say anything nice about him. And all of this going down the road ended up being true as you read through the book of Genesis. But at the time that he received the promise, the people around Joseph weren't ready to hear it. And this can happen to us. I mean, God can speak something to you, and there's almost always someone who's willing to tell you why it's not going to work. There are always going to be naysayers who find problems with everything, not in a means of bettering, but in a means of, you shouldn't do that. Not everyone's going to get it, but here's the thing. God didn't give the dream to everyone. God gave it to you. And just like God spoke to Joseph about things in his life that people around him weren't ready, God might speak to you about things in your life that the people around you aren't ready. And if you let it out too soon, you're going to get the naysayers and why it won't work and hurt feelings and all sorts of stuff. And so there are things that we just need to hold and pray and trust God's will in the right season to grow the right way to move it into fruition. Some vision isn't for anyone else yet. His brothers were done with him due to the dream that God had given him. They weren't ready to hear it. And people will drag down your dreams because they're not ready. And wisdom is knowing when and where and who to share with at what time. We have to personally, when you feel God speaks something to you, we have to handle the holy well before the world can really hear it correctly. Joseph had tattled on his brothers, told his dad about them doing a bad job. He shared dreams of them bowing to him. He wore a special coat in a way that probably wasn't too humble. And he did all of this as a young teen in a dysfunctional family. He didn't really know fully, I think, how to carry the favor and the blessing of God in his life. And so God was going to work on him. Detour number one. He got thrown in a pit. And that's it. The purpose of a detour is to develop you. And God develops us often when he's ready to move us to a new spiritual level. And things tend to get worse before they get better. That's what a pit is. We don't really like it, but it doesn't make it less true. The development stage is often the painful stage because there's a breaking of our thoughts and ways and an introduction of more of his presence. Things just don't work the way I want them to or thought they would. God breaks stuff down to build it differently. New levels always involve surrender and obedience. And the level of success in your life is directly related to the amount of pain that you can deal with. Are we willing to walk through discomfort for his will, for his perfect will in our life? And so God creates detours to do some work in us. Now, a year or so ago, we changed out the windows in our main sanctuary and got new windows. It's awesome, great move for us. But one of the things that we wanted to do was to, kind of represent our history. I don't think you ever forget your history, but move our history forward. And so we took time and took out some of the colored glass from the windows and saved it. And we are in the process of making a cross out of these glass to be able to hang in our sanctuary to kind of honor our history. And it has been a long process. It has been a long process, a lot of work. One, when the construction folks were taking them out, we had to save them. We had to go remove all the stuff around it to be able to knock the glass out in a way that it wouldn't break and wouldn't bust it, and keep it and clean it. And then it had to be scored, and then you had to break it certain ways, and then you have to grind it so that it fits together and shapes the form that you want it to shape, and then you have to wrap it in this foil and put solder in there, and you have to solder it and then surround it by metal to give it strength, provided strength. Now, if you're an artist, you're kind of thinking he doesn't have a clue what he's talking about, and I know a little bit, but I am a novice, and I understand that I'm saying it in very novice terms, but there's a lot that goes on into it. It's been a lot of work, and I'm really hoping by the end of the year we'll be ready to launch this thing. But this is what God does. God takes our lives. He takes us. He cleans us up. He shapes us. He fits us together in a way that we form a body that, when it functions, is unstoppable. The church, when the church is healthy and functioning healthy, hell cannot stop it. And this is what God does. And I think the way that I handle the detours of my life determine how long I'm in them to become the person He's trying to make me. Development is always part of the process of destiny. And, your blessing can be a cursing. And I think one of the worst things that could happen is that God brings us to a destiny that we aren't mentally, emotionally, spiritually really prepared to handle in a way that honors Him. Timing is key. And so what if God can't put you where He's called you because you're not ready yet to function in it? We have to trust God with the process. He's got to shape us. He's got to shape our character, deal with the hidden things, our sin, our immaturity, our fears, our doubts, our humanity. And that might take a detour or 2 or 3 or 4. And they can be painful and uncomfortable, but they are the refiner's fire that change us and shape us and help us to be prepared. If I saw detours as preparation for something more and greater, I might handle them differently. I might carry them differently. Now I'm diabetic, type 1, and I shared this, and I don't enjoy it. There's nothing fun about the pills. There's nothing fun about the shots every day, and testing my sugar all the time. And the truth is, I don't enjoy it. Now, I could complain about it. I could whine and moan and groan about it. It's not fair. I don't eat bad. I don't really have unhealthy habits. My pancreas just decided to stop making insulin. And I can huff and fuss about it. Or I can look at my life and say, you know what? Ultimately, I believe that God is in control and that my life is His. And if this is a cross that God has asked me to carry it, how do I carry it in a way that brings Him glory and brings Him honor? Can God heal me? Yeah, absolutely. I pray for Him to. Will He? I don't know. He's sovereign. I'm not. If He wants to heal me, I'm ready. And if He wants me to carry this, I'll carry this. But I want to do it in a way that brings Him glory. I want God's will for my life. Joseph's first detour landed him in a pit, and they were going to kill him, kill the dream, and kill it all, once and for all. And they came up with the story that a wild animal had attacked him and torn up his coat. And, Monk could have figured this out. Angela Lansbury, Murder, She Wrote, she would have figured it out. But instead, they decided to sell him, and that's detour kind of number 2. They stripped him of what he valued, his coat, his significance, his symbol of favoritism. And that can happen to us. There are times in detours that I think we have to lay down what we prize the most. And we all have different personalities. We all have different things that we dread. But until I'm really willing to say, God, I lay it all at your feet. I lay down what I love the most because I love you the most. I think we detours continue to work in us. And that's why Abraham, who had waited so long for the promise, of a son. God said, you're going to have a son, and you're going to be the father of a generation, and the stars in the sky and sand at the sea. And yet when his first son was born, God said, will you give him to me? Will you give me Isaac? And that's hard. I've waited so long for this, but you can't love it more than God. You work hard at work and put in the time and do the extra, and then you get overlooked for a promotion. What do I do with that? You serve your family, love your spouse, your kids. You work hard to provide, and sometimes you're taken for granted. You're taken for granted, and what do you do with that? We can rely on ourselves so much until it gets stripped away, and it's often at the bottom, that people meet God, and while it's a hard moment in time, it is a beautiful moment. And Joseph went from favor and position to literally rock bottom of a pit. A pit is a hole that you can't get out of by yourself. It's a situation that you can't fix. It is a rebellious child you can't control or get back home. It is a boss who you can't escape from. You're helpless in it. You feel helpless in it. It's a family member who puts it all on you but then won't listen to counsel. It's a spouse that's unresponsive, and even though you try and you love and you serve and you reach and you try to be what God's asked you to be, it's just not returned and whatnot. A pit can be a lot of things, but the most important thing is that you're stuck in it. Joseph didn't dig the pit, but he was in it. No food, no water, no way out, no hope. The dream looked dead, and it was completely out of his control. And that is maybe exactly where God wanted him to be. Why? Because it teaches us that we were never that much in control to start. Divine favor is not bound to what happens on earth. And I love this. If you hear one thing I say tonight, please hear this. If God has blessed you, I don't care who on earth curses you. Heaven pours out on earth, and God had a plan for the life of Joseph, and it was going to use all of this to shape his character and mature him spiritually. The greater the destiny, the deeper the pit. And so be encouraged, and eventually they sold him away and they profited off of him rather than kill him. And that's how he ends up in Egypt, alone. And, when we go through things, we don't always understand, and we tend to blame God and get angry and get resentful. And the whole time God's doing this for our good. God just takes our anger and he takes our mean words and he takes our bitterness towards him and shaking our fist at God. Why did you let this happen? And because he knows one day he's going to grow us to the point that we see it differently. And it's for our good. I doubt Joseph thought that the slave traders who purchased him were an answer to prayer. I think he just wanted to get out of the pit and go home. Hey guys, let me out of here. I'll never wear the robe again. I'll never talk about any dream I ever have again. You guys win. I'll shut up. It doesn't need to go this far. It doesn't need to be this. Just let me go home. And it had to be hard. He probably wanted, rather in the pit, when you make yourself available to God, I think God can really do some things in our lives. And when we make ourselves available, I think we're going to discover that God's hand is with us and on us, and he's leading our lives, and he strengthens us. He heals us. He delivers us and moves us to the place that he wants us to be. That God has a plan for your life. And so try not to fight the detours that are designed to take you to it. Even in the pain, give him praise, because God is in control, so trust him. And know this, I'll close with this, that God has great things for you. And so I bless you because he blesses you. First Assembly, I love you. I believe in you. I believe that the best is yet to come. So let's stay steady. Let's keep living. Let's keep hearing, and let's keep obeying, and let's trust the Lord. Y'all have a great week, and tell somebody about Jesus.